Hello, my name is Lisa and I'm Swedish. Another Swedish woman has now tragically committed suicide after being group raped in Sweden. And of course I feel very sad and angry about this, and I wanted to make a video because basically it seems like there's this new rape epidemic in all of Europe. That's first of all why I do this in English. There might be other countries where it could be helpful, maybe the UK, for example. Unfortunately, I know something about trauma recovery from personal experience. So big disclaimer first, this is only my personal opinions. I'm not a professional healthcare provider in any way, so please don't take this as actual support advice as far as it being anything other than just my personal experience trying to recover from trauma in Sweden, in the Swedish system. I think I've learned some things. I have experienced rape and other trauma, and it's very difficult to get support for this in Sweden. So this video is directed to any man or woman who has been raped in any way, and specifically in Sweden. Because basically what happens is that when it comes to group rape, you have two problems. First, you have the trauma of the rape itself, and then you have another trauma, which is kind of unique for Sweden. It's that you are then met with several systems that are severely abusive. And specifically, they are emotionally abusive. Another name for it would be narcissistically abusive, because they use the same type of method that all narcissists use in abusing their victim. And the systems are first the police system. Unfortunately, they are extremely abusive as a system to everyone. I would assume, I don't know everyone, but I would say that most people that are met with their system will experience this abuse. Then it's the healthcare system, which is extremely, extremely malignant in Sweden right now. And I think it has to do with just too little funding, and then everyone just freaks out. The third system is the sick income insurance system, and it's called the Försäkringskassan in Sweden. Basically, if you're too injured after the rape to be able to work, you're going to have something to do with them after a certain period of time. This is a big problem because they're extremely toxic and malignant. And the fourth office you may have to be in contact with is the tax office, Skattemyndigheten. This would be in case you need a protected identity, like if they couldn't catch these people and you want to have your home address, you don't want it to be on the internet. This is a huge problem in Sweden, where we have very strong laws for open information. So basically, yeah, you have to deal with this situation. So that's where I wanted to share a little bit about how how I personally have been able to recover, and what I've learned, the mistakes that I've learned in dealing with the system. It's quite significant. Basically, I want to do like an emergency toolkit with 7 different aspects in it. So the first one thing to remember is that you are suffering now. If you're suffering from PTSD. If you're not suffering and everything's fine, then don't watch the video. But if you're really suffering and you can't seem to get out of depression and thoughts of suicide and mood swings up and down, then you're most likely suffering from PTSD. And that's post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's not just like you're being a bit stressed out. You're like, actually, it's a mental disorder, a serious, very serious condition. And you may know it from like American soldiers. They return home from war and they get this. Not everyone, but a significant amount of them, depending upon how much trauma they've been exposed to. And like I said, it's a very serious condition. It's a mental health illness, mental illness. And basically it's temporary. And you have to remember, it's not a weakness. It's just a result of the trauma. Bones break after a certain pressure, and it's the same thing with trauma. If you're traumatized enough, you will get PTSD. And a lot of times in Sweden, the medical doctors they don't have the time to spend with you, and they don't have, I think, the skill to really put the right diagnosis. So if you're really suffering, I would say read up on PTSD, and then bring whatever symptoms you have, bring it into your doctor and ask, like, could this be PTSD? And if they don't know, ask to see another doctor who might know. A lot of the time you'll get the wrong diagnosis, which would be maybe depression. And the wrong diagnosis will give you the wrong treatment. And this is very dangerous, because if I have if I have an appendix problem, for example, and they start treating my thyroid, then I would die. So it's very important that you get the right diagnosis. The second thing also to remember here that I wanted to share in my toolkit is a very important phone number. This is for the San Francisco Suicide Prevention Hotline. And the number is, and this is in America, so it's a country number +1, and then 415-781-0500. Again, that's 1-415-781-0500. And if you get Skype, if you have Skype, it's really cheap to call, even though it's international. The calls are usually limited to about 10 minutes or so, so it's not going to be super expensive. But they are really amazing, they're super skilled, and you can, I would say, I would trust them. You're supposed to live in San Francisco in order to use the service, so after you've recovered, I would really suggest that you give them a donation, and you can calculate pretty much how much money you would have spent, how many times you call them. I think they get a really low pay. They get like 150 kroner per hour or so. But the service is paid for by the city of San Francisco. So that's why you really should live there technically. But it's fine. You can be honest with them. I always am. And they won't let you die. You know, they're not going to be like, no, you don't live in San Francisco. You can't talk to us. You can totally trust them. But do please pay back to them if you do use their service. They're very, very good. And also, another reason why they don't really like you to call is that if they think that you really need to go to hospital, they usually will call the police in San Francisco so that you can get the support. But they obviously can't do that when you're in Sweden. So I would say take their advice. If they say you need to go to hospital, then you should. The reason I mention this is because all of the suicide prevention hotlines and the support hotlines in Sweden that I've tried, including the women's hotlines, they're very, very dangerous places to. I mean, they're narcissistically abusive, which means you can get triggered by it, which means you can get a flashback, and this is a dangerous situation for you. So I would recommend strongly against it, frankly. But do call for support, but call maybe anywhere outside of Sweden. I haven't tried a lot of other places except for this San Francisco Suicide Prevention Hotline. Them I can really recommend. They're really good. At times I've called them like 4 times a day sometimes, and they're really amazing. And you can call them as often as you need to get through the day. So I really recommend that. Okay, number 3, accept that you are on your own. Your community, they're not going to understand what you're going through. Friends and co-workers and so on, they can't give you the support that you need here. So you also need to accept, and this is hard, that there is really no police or justice system that you can really count on here. The healthcare system, you can't count on it. Your sick income insurance system, you absolutely cannot count on it. This is if you're too sick, injured, or traumatized to go to work. You should know that Försäkringskassan is really no longer in operation. And no, this is kind of shocking, and I think that's why people that are group raped, they're not only totally traumatized and exposed to this awful crime, and then they also realize, what? There's no insurance for me? What? There's no police, there's no healthcare. And it's so shocking. It's like two shocks in one that it's really dangerous. That's why I'm saying this right now. Already before anyone gets raped, know this, that there's no insurance for you. So this means that, yeah, there's ways to work around that, and I'll talk about that later. But there basically are no services anymore as far as Försäkringskassan is concerned, especially if you have PTSD, because you're not going to be able to fight them without going insane. So it's dangerous. And I mean insane, I mean you're going to, it's going to make you more likely to commit suicide if you have to deal with them. So don't deal with them. And I'll talk about it later, how you can avoid that. Also the tax office, you are also on your own there. You're not going to get protected identity. There is really not a lot of support for women in Sweden, contrary to belief. You'd think that with a Swedish feminism is so strong here, you think that there's like women's organizations. No. Doesn't exist. Forget about it. It really doesn't exist. This is also shocking, but if you know this, then you can work around that. Basically, the way to deal with abuse, and narcissistic abuse specifically, is to avoid it altogether. When you can't avoid it, you have to minimize it. Because if you continue to expose yourself to abuse after you've been really traumatized, that's going to be very dangerous. Your risk of suicide will go up. So, number 4, this is probably the most important part. Find an anchor. Basically, ask yourself, why should I survive? And ask yourself this when you're calm, ask it when you're upset, ask it at all times. Why? Find what's important to you, your own core value, something that you can count on. That could be coffee. And I'm not kidding. It could be like a small pleasure like that. Like, why should I live? Well, there's coffee. By the way, coffee also reduces the risk with like a high percentage, I think like 50% or something. So it could be good, but not over drinking it. Another thing, for me, I can say what helped for me was I would just tell myself, I felt strongly rather, that I wanted to help the next generation to see if healing is possible. So if I could figure out how to heal, that would be good for them. And I felt that it was my duty to do so. So for me to be like, it's my duty, that was something that was my anchor, something that made me decide to continue living, because it's my duty. Because, you know, from when life consists of only pain and destruction, then it's very hard, and you have to have an anchor. Also, one thing that helped me was my thirst for revenge, and I would like plan it out, but not do anything, because it's problematic to get into that kind of area. And obviously, don't do anything that's illegal ever. But I think that letting your thoughts go towards revenge, exactly how that would look, could be very healthy. Maybe. But again, it's not psychological advice. I'm not. But I'm just telling you that helped for me. That really helped. But I also think that, you know, it could be something like coffee, or like, oh, I have a cat or something. So these things are really important, because they are what can get you through the darkest hour. And usually the time you're suicidal is usually just a short period of time, 5 to 10 minutes. So if you can just get through that, you know, and then you can have a little bit of a break, and then it'll come again. But getting through that part is really important. Also, one of the things I used was to list all the things that I thought were meaningful and that I appreciated about life. It wasn't such a long list, maybe like 5 things, but it's a good start, and it can become anchor as well. When it comes to the number 5, which is day-to-day emotional survival, basically there's so much I could talk about that I do, but I don't want to risk giving any psychological advice, as I'm not a healthcare provider. But I have tools that help me cope every day with PTSD. And the biggest problem is actually something called flashbacks. And you probably have seen about this in movies. Again, oftentimes American movies about soldiers, they'll have flashbacks. Like, they'll hear a sound, and then all of a sudden they'll throw themselves on the ground, thinking, oh, it's a bomb, when it's not. It's just a sound or something, like a car tire might break or something. So that's one flashback, and then you can get like auditory or visual memory. But then there's another kind of flashback, and it's called emotional flashback. This one takes a little time to kind of recognize, because it's like suddenly, with no warning, no trigger, nothing, you just suddenly feel awful, terrible, for no reason. That's an emotional flashback. So you only remember the feeling, but not a thought or sound or something. And that can be triggered by nothing, a word, or some absolutely like a cup of coffee, and could be what then triggers you. So it's really tough to say, but you have to just learn to recognize it, and then you have to find tools to handle it in a good way. Because basically PTSD causes, it's a fight-flight response. There are also others called freeze and fawn response. There's a lot of information out there about it, but if you're just in a panic, just like the most important thing is to find support for yourself, because basically you can see it as it's like a super mega like emergency warning, death threat reaction to a really mundane stimuli, like there a little dog walks by, and all of a sudden it's a complete freak out. So this is important to find the tools. And how do you then find the tools? It's really hard, because there's long lines. I mean, the healthcare system is something that you have to go to the doctor, you have to do it, but you have to also minimize the contact. So, and it's going to take you long, no matter what you do. It's going to take probably 6 months before you can expect to get to see a counselor. So what I would say then is to find a free counselor. There are still some services, and it doesn't really matter what they specialize in, so long as you have someone that you can talk to. This would be important. So even the RFSU, they have free counselors. Social service office you can call sometimes and ask them. There could be some support group. Basically, you can't possibly do this alone, and you cannot count on friends and coworkers and family. They just can't understand this. I would actually say I would avoid talking about it with people that aren't educated about it, because they can say something that re-traumatizes you, like, oh, why don't you just forget about things? Don't think about it. Get over it. It happened 3 months ago. Why are you still talking about this? Stuff like that. And it can be really upsetting, and then you can get a flashback. A flashback is dangerous, because you're super overreacting. And at that point, you can commit suicide, just because it's overwhelming. Also, I would say really important channel to go to on YouTube is the SpartanLifeCoach.com. And I'll put the information under the video here. So you can watch free YouTube videos there, and he will teach a lot of techniques on how to cope with emotional flashbacks. And he's actually educated, so he can do it properly. And also I would recommend buying one of his courses. They're very cheap, so you can probably get away with paying for that and start the process during the time that you're waiting to get therapy. Because you have to expect it to take at least 6 months, no matter where you are in Sweden, to get a specialist therapist that works with PTSD. And this is only if you're lucky enough to get the correct diagnosis. And then I think that, I don't know how much I want to get into it, but of course, rape causes just so much loss, and it's really hard to understand this unless you've gone through it yourself. Because it's not just like, oh, that was a really bad event, but it actually now has changed who you are. It can affect your capacity to have sex. You might have hepatitis C now. There's really no protection from that. HIV, you can contract it. You should know that there are the prophylactic against HIV. Actually, that's number 6 in the list here. Ask for it at the hospital. I don't know if they do give it here routinely, but if they didn't catch the perpetrators, then they don't know if they are HIV positive or not. Or maybe even if they catch them, there's still a couple of months where they could have just contracted it. So there is this medication you can take against HIV before you actually get it, if you've been exposed to it. And that can be kind of calming to know that you can do that. But I'm not sure about if they do that in Swedish hospitals, but I don't know what to do. If they don't give it, you can probably travel to Europe and get it there, maybe. But so much is also lost when you're exposed to a rape, because trust is gone. In trust both in the world and in yourself, like why I couldn't protect myself. And also, as a result, the PTSD might then cause you to lose your job. Then you could lose your home. And then you might also just lose your friends, because you just can't talk with them anymore, because you feel so far away from them. And hopefully that doesn't happen, but it's definitely a risk. So people don't understand all the consequences of rape. Yeah, the most important thing is that it's definitely not your fault that this happened, and all the losses that come are also not your fault, because they are completely logical if you think about the bigger perspective. Number 7 is the practical survival, and this is a really big one in Sweden, because it's going to be quite strange to suddenly be thrown into this. You might have had just a completely normal life, gone to work, and maybe gone to the doctors once a year, never gone to the police, and just talk, the tax office once a year or something. So all of a sudden you have to deal with all this stuff. And the first thing I would say when it comes to practical survival is go to work. Just do it. Just go to work. Don't think, like people say, oh, you should rest and take care of yourself and until you feel better. And yeah, you can't work, obviously not. Like you're just crying for hours every day. No, don't do that. Just go to work. You can cry at work. Go and lock yourself in the bathroom for hours and cry if you have to. Because this is about your survival. Because, unless you can live on your savings. But do not contact the Försäkringskassan, because it will only traumatize you. You don't have them. They don't have your back. They don't have the insurance you paid into doesn't exist. Sorry, it's just gonna be better that you know this and find other ways to function instead. And also, this is really important because you need to avoid future abuse. So you have to really, really go no contact. When you're talking about spousal abuse, they always say, well, go no contact. You have to stop all contact with the abuser. And it's the same here. You have to stop and minimize contact with these systems that are so malignant. So basically the unions are strong in Sweden. So even if you do have to spend a lot of time at work not being effective, that is actually okay. And you can lie down at work, you can cry there in the bathroom, you can make the important phone calls from work, you can go to therapy during work hours and so on. And the thing is that the way that you don't want your employer to suffer from you not being able to work, but you also can't be sick, because the employer will lose a certain productivity from you during a certain time, but you risk dying if you don't go to work, because you'll be so upset that you're now also going to fall into poverty, and you're going to be fighting with an insurance company, and it's not going to go well. So rather focus your time on work instead and do as much work as you can. And then go to the unemployment office and ask them for this thing called disability employment. So some of the areas that still function in Sweden is the unemployment office. They have a lot of money, so they have a lot of support, they have a lot of people working there. So you can go there very quickly, you can get an appointment, ask them for a disability employment, talk to someone who understands disability. Then the government will pay your employer. Because basically you just became disabled. And yeah, it's really tough to accept, but that's just how it is, because you become mentally disabled from an injury. And this is the injury, is the group rape, and it will affect you physically and psychologically. So you then have these support. You can get support for disabilities, and they have pretty strong support there. And I wouldn't worry so much. They can't really fire you, and even if you do get fired, then you at least have unemployment income. So there's basically the only thing that doesn't exist is sick income. Like if you're sick, you're not going to get covered for that. And work also can be very therapeutical, because you will get your mind off of the trauma, and this can be helpful for PTSD to just get a little break from all the trauma thoughts. And you know, even if you do get flashbacks at work and so on, which you will, then it's fine. Just be there and have that instead. It's not going to feel better when you're alone at home. So basically, that's the best way to deal with the Försäkringskassan is to have absolutely no contact with them at all, because they're extremely, extremely nasty. You know, they're not going to send you a letter saying no to you when they say no. They're going to send you a letter that will crush you. So don't risk that. You don't want to be crushed while you've just been group raped brutally. So go no contact with them, absolutely. Försäkringskassan, very malignant. Then it's the police system, and also I would say just minimize contact with them. Get a lawyer, talk to your lawyer, and just let the lawyer deal with whatever they have to deal with, because, you know, ideally get a private lawyer is going to help you so much. Obviously it's very expensive, so I don't know how that's possible, but I would say just absolutely minimize the contact you have with the police. And of course, please continue to report rapes. It helps everyone to get the statistics, the reality of the statistics. And also push through the entire process. And like I said before, for me, my thirst for revenge was like an anchor for me, like a driving force. I would be like, I really don't want to live anymore, but I really, really want to see them get their punishment. Now, I didn't succeed, but it helped me through that difficult time, which is so important. So you can really use that. Okay, so then there is the healthcare system, and again, I would strongly suggest minimizing contact with them, because it's hard to minimize the contact, because you do need them for the diagnosis and the treatment. But I would say, if possible, find a private therapist if you can possibly afford it. Someone that specializes in trauma and PTSD treatment. And if you can't afford it, I would recommend then buying some classes from the SpartanLifeCoach.com, and also going to a counselor that's maybe free somewhere. Because the Swedish healthcare system is really strongly narcissistically abusive, and so really, you know, the therapists that you can get, they're usually very good, and so on. The specialists, the doctors are good, but it's getting to them that's hard. You basically, you know, you have to fight with nurses and the whole system. It's a complete nightmare. But basically, if you have the strength to get through it, and you can see if you can have a friend go with you to try to. It's very hard. Like, if you don't have to deal with it, don't. But if you have to, then try to seek support and have a friend come with you. And then once you've gone through that, you can then, usually it's like 6 months of waiting line, and then during that time you can then pay for your own therapy perhaps, or find a counselor that's free. Because basically getting PTSD treatment, that is essentially the ultimate thing that's going to save your life. That's what you need to get, and everything else needs to just support you going to that treatment. That's how you can get over this. If you want to get an appointment with a doctor within a reasonable time, like within not like 2-month wait or so, then what I've found is smaller areas, going just anywhere outside the city to a smaller area. You just get listed there, and usually you can get in within a couple of weeks. So you can get listed. Also, I would suggest 1177.se. It's the best place because you don't have to talk to a person, but you still have to receive the emails from them, which will be upsetting, I should say. But yeah, that's I guess the best way to wrangle them is to find a small place and to have a friend come with you, and then as soon as you have the diagnosis and your prescription to see a specialist, then you just have no contact. Then the tax office. I would say do submit the paperwork with the police report and your request for getting protected identity. If not any other reason, but for the statistical, so you'll see how many people are applying for it. you probably will have to accept that you're going to get denied. There are two ways around it that could work. Not perfect, but it's a possibility. You can change your name. It's free if you take your mother's maiden name, and you can change it back for free anytime as well. And the new ID card is, I think, 450 kroner, and it's pretty fast. You can just, you again have to deal with the police office then, but it's not a huge, big problem. You know, if you go to a smaller area, so again, you may not be able to get it in your city, but you can travel to a smaller place. Then there is the old classical way of being written at a friend's place. Technically this is illegal, so I can't obviously recommend you doing it, but it is something that exists. I don't know what the penalty is for it, but it's maybe not that much money if you're trying to save your life, you know. Then there is the, you know, you can get a PO box, a post box, but that's a bad idea. They're not going to accept it. They won't let you get written on the PO box. I found this out the hard way. So it's a complete waste of money. But the other two ways are, it will give you some level of protection, but the fact is that anyone can still call the tax office and ask if you have changed your name, and then they have to say yes, she changed her name to this. So it's not a great protection, but it's something. And maybe you want to feel like you're doing something to protect your life, you know. So then I realized that in working you have to avoid the narcissistically abusive systems, but equally important is to find the systems and the support that does work. There are still some places that do function and have good support. And one of them, surprisingly, in my experience, has been the unemployment office. They're very funded right now. So it's easy to get an appointment, and you know, you can talk to different people with quite big ease. So basically they have a strong support for disabilities. And this is where I think that may be a little difficult for people to realize, oh, I was gang raped, so now I'm disabled. But that's how it is. It is temporary. You will heal from it. But temporarily, yes, you're disabled. And then, so think of yourself as disabled, and you need to get that kind of support. And so at the unemployment office, they have a really good disability support. There are people that are good at that. They know how they can support you. There's a lot of different programs that can help you. And so that your employer doesn't have to suffer because you can't be productive as you should be. But make sure you go to work every day, because you can't be home sick. Then you get no money, nothing. They can't help you. The unemployment office won't be able to help you. So even if you have to take a taxi to work every day, you will still, the net plus was at the end of the day will still be plus. But if you have someone like a friend come over and just help you get dressed, get in a taxi and go to work, stay at work, and you'll be surprised, because hopefully, because it does keep you think about other things. You focus on work, that'll help you also recover, and will help you in those ways as well. Even though it's not ideal, it's just the reality. So do yourself a favor and do go to work. There are also some city services that function. Personligt, ombud and Boendestöd are two really good services that totally function, and they're not narcissistically abusive. Surprisingly, they're really good. And it is systems that are made for mentally ill people. And when you have PTSD, you really are mentally ill, very, very sick. And again, it's temporary and it's treatable, but it can be fatal. And you have still the right to some services in Sweden, and these are the services that really function well. And one of the problems with PTSD, it causes not only depression, but it causes a lot of practical problems in dealing with modern lifestyle. For example, opening mail, paying bills, being in contact with all these agencies, making it for appointments on time. those things are things that you probably dealt with no problem at all your entire life, and all of a sudden you can't do it now, because it causes flashbacks, opening mail, paying bills, any small stressful things will just make you completely not functional. And this is why we see so many American soldiers coming back to the US after war, and they become homeless. And not all of them become addicts. It's very hard to function with this condition, the PTSD. But you can get support from Personligt, ombud. I very much recommend, but you do need a diagnosis first. So you can't just go to them and say, like, I feel suicidal, so can someone help me open my mail? They won't do that. You need to first go through the healthcare system and get the correct diagnosis, if it then is PTSD that you have. But this person will be really great because they can really help you also be the contact person, the person that actually calls the police and talks to them. Like they help you do that so that you don't get triggered, because they won't get an emotional flashback from it. They won't get flashback. They will be very injured also by dealing with these narcissistic systems, but they do have ways to handle it, and they're paid to do it, and they're not personally involved, so it doesn't get as insulting. They don't get personally super insulted, maybe in the best case. But anyways, that profession, it's obviously is their choice, and they have ways to deal with it. It's part of their education and so on. But in general, I would say they're really nice. And if there's something you don't really like, you can change them easily. It's not like the other systems where you're really stuck with your doctor for so on. Also, when you get the letter from the police or the unemployment of Försäkringskassan, anything like that, they can be there with you, because it may not be something your friend can help you with, because your friends aren't really educated to handle a severe mental health condition, but these people are. They really are able to keep you calm, and for you to remember that there are ways to find solutions to problems, because that may not be so easy to remember. When you have PTSD, you don't have access to the same mental capacity that you did before. So you may think, I've always paid my rent on time, I've always paid my bills, no problem. Why shouldn't I be able to now? But just relax into that. Like, you need support around that, probably when you have severe PTSD. Because what you don't want to happen, you don't want to all of a sudden not pay rent or bills and get, find out, oh, you paid your bill late. Then that's going to give you another flashback. So it's just a really negative, a very dangerous negative spiral that you want to avoid and that you can avoid. So these are the areas where you can get support. You can also, get Boendestöd, and you can get support at your workplace, like a personal assistant. And again, that's the unemployment office can help you with this. And your Personliga ombud, they will help you with all this. They will help you navigate the entire situation, because all of a sudden, you're not just dealing with your regular life and working full time. You're also dealing with the tax office and the police office and the unemployment office and the doctor's office. It's just a lot to deal with. And this is not something that people may think about. They think about, oh, the scary, traumatizing group rape. Yes. But then the situation becomes chaotic. The entire life becomes chaotic a lot of the time. So I would say get those are the areas where you can really get support. And go there and get that support and actively avoid the other areas. But I think that people are not getting the correct information. That's why I feel like I should do this video, because it's really confusing, because you think, well, I go to the doctor when I need help. But no, avoid the doctor. You have to a certain degree, but actively avoid it if you can, and minimize the contact. And also bring your Personligt ombud, bring them to the doctor, because the doctor could be nasty to you, and that would be very traumatizing. So, yeah, don't take any risks that you don't have to, So number 8, the philosophical and a little bit political level. Basically, Swedish people have very strong inner critics, in my opinion, in my experience. I think maybe it has to do with us being a Lutheran country and socialist, maybe, I don't know. Basically, we're very good at always doing the right thing, and we feel very responsible, you know, for our own actions and our choices, and this is a good thing. It's good, but when it becomes too much, it becomes like an inner critic that constantly criticizes us. That's a risk factor, because basically we get into this, oh, it's my fault, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have gotten whatever drunk or gotten in the car with this man or opened the door without looking. You know, it's very easy for us to just take that on, and that's dangerous, because when there's trauma involved, the inner critic gets activated. It's almost like the inner critic gets a steroid injection, and it just becomes intense. And again, this is temporary. This will go away when the PTSD is healed. But when this happens, the inner critic becomes actually deadly. So this is just why I think as Swedish people in general will be more vulnerable to this. Because it's harder for us to say, it's your fault. It's actually your fault. We just blame ourselves a lot. But I just like to say that, in my opinion, that there's really nothing that a Swedish person could have done differently, because basically we have been poorly prepared by the upbringing. Because basically I grew up in Sweden, and what I was taught by the system, and mostly in my family as well, is that everyone is deep inside, they're good. And generally people are trustworthy, you know, and there's a lot of support in Sweden for women specifically. And those three things they're not true. It's actually misinformation. And this misinformation has led to a neurotic naivety. It's basically this malignant optimism that people talk about online. I think it's Sam Vaknin talks about that. It's very dangerous. It's not true that everyone is good deep inside. It's not true that people are generally trustworthy. It's not anymore. And there is not support for women in Sweden. There's not support for anyone. We're all on our own at this time. So, yeah, it's not your fault. It's no wonder that you ended up in this situation, because based upon those three assumptions, you were safe to live in the way that you were living. So it's not your fault at all. And all the choices that we make. I mean, this particular latest suicide was a woman who, she didn't look in the hole in the door when someone rang her doorbell, and so she opened. She thought it was her neighbor, and basically, no one does that. No one in Sweden looks in the hole. We don't do that because we've been told that most people are good deep inside, and generally people are trustworthy and there's support for us. So why would we look through the hole? I mean, honestly, I think that if I were to look through my hole every time I open the door, people would think I was neurotic. I said, no one does that. But that's going to be the thing that's going to kill you. It's going to be, why didn't you look in the hole? Why didn't you look in it? It's your own fault. It's your own fault. So that's why it's really just important to take in the Swedish aspect, how we were raised, what type of ideas that we were raised with. That I think as a nation we suffer from neurotic naivety, and it's very dangerous, and it's deadly if we don't see that that's part of why we were misinformed. So we can't be blamed for that, because when we were children we were misinformed, you know. So that's what I really wanted to say as well. Yeah, I think that basically it may be that it was always incorrect, but it's also maybe that it's become more dangerous now. It seems like there are more dangerous. The group rape was very, very, very rare 20 years ago, and it's not anymore. But basically, again, there's not a lot of information about that, making it, again, not your fault. To go in a car with some friends that happen to be men, of course you do. That's not your fault. It's what we do. And maybe if you're American listening to this, you think like, well, you can't do that. But in Sweden, you could, and that was totally normal. And it would be totally awkward to be like, no, I'm not going to get in the car with you. Like, what? Because they're guys? They're your friends. What, are you kidding? Or do you think you're going to get raped? I mean, you can't really, it's a really difficult situation. But basically, I just hope that this video will help people realize that there's ways to get through this, and please don't give up. Please keep fighting, because we do need you to continue fight for finding ways to heal and for this to stop. So by all means, please do find the support you can find, but know also what support to avoid. I think it's key. Be safe out there.